Hi, this is Matt Molnar. I'm here with Nate Walke. We're the co-founders at Code City. We also have Chaz Becker here with us, who is one of our speakers rather, at our Monday night kind of hangouts. And so we just kind of wanted to do this kind of podcast thing where we're trying to see what adds value and what kind of work we can document. And so we're definitely looking for feedback, looking to see what everyone listening enjoys, what you don't enjoy, where we can improve, that sort of thing. And once we kind of find what it is that is enjoyable and what people are finding value in, we're going to go ahead and maybe focus these podcasts on those efforts more. So today we thought we would kind of do something a little less of an interview and more of a conversational piece. Nate wants to kind of start us off talking about starting companies or just organizations in general from nothing. Sometimes it's easy to think, oh, we need $1 million to start a company, or I need 100 grand, or I need to have all these connections, or I need to know all these people, or whatever. And there's a lot of entrepreneurs out there who would tell you that no, you don't necessarily need those things. But I think it's beneficial and valuable to hear it from people who have actually done it. And Nate has actually done it. So we're going to let him start out there, and then Chaz and I will just kind of fill in and see what happens here.
See what the banter role.
There you go.
Yeah, so it's kind of funny. I've often told people that I started a graphic design company with no computer. And the way that happened was, this would have been the early 2000s. I had a friend of mine who knew that I could draw. I used to do a lot of pencil sketches, and he got a new job at an engineering company. And he came to me and he said, Nate, my company said that we'll pay you $300 if you can design our logo. And I had just sold the computer that I had at that time, and I didn't have the software. It was the Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator at the time. And those used to be $12,000 or $2,000 programs. And so I thought, oh, wow, $300, that's a week's worth of money for me. And Kinko's at the time, you could rent their computers with Photoshop for $60 an hour. So it was $1 a minute. And I only had $10 left to my name. And I thought, wow, if I want this $300, I've got to go design this logo in 10 minutes. So I went to Kinko's, paid the $10 and saved it on a 100 megabyte floppy drive. And that was one of my first transactions for a solid amount of money that gave me the kind of the incentive to keep going with the graphic design thing. That's how it started. But what it proved to me was I did always have this notion that to be a graphic design company, I had to have a building, and I had to have a receptionist and 4 designers and people to take calls and a ton of clients to come in and make these orders. And I realized that was kind of backwards. Those things are huge expenses. The overhead of the utilities and the lights and the rental of the space were things that were unnecessary to the function of the business. And so that really opened my eyes to how much we can do with just the resources we have, and came to find out later there's a term for that called bootstrapping, and it means using the resources at hand to accomplish the things you need to do. So yeah, it was really fun.
So I already thinking of at least 1 or 2 questions I kind of want to throw at you there.
Yeah.
So first of all, had you done any design work for freelance before that?
I had.
Job? Okay.
Yeah. It was more side projects. I had always worked somewhere else.
Uh-huh.
And prior to that, I had spent a few $1,000s on some computer equipment, and had some pirated copies. I don't know why I'm putting this on record of Adobe stuff, but I think everybody allegedly, right?
Allegedly.
So yeah, I had some side projects that really didn't pay anything. I think what was unique about this situation was I really desperately needed money at the time, and the way this client just was kind of thrown into my lap.
So apparently you didn't have the computer equipment anymore?
I had just sold it, right.
Okay.
Had a bunch of things going on, needed some quick cash, as a lot of 20-somethings do, and unloaded that, and had a roommate situation going on, trying to pay the car payment and all that. So
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
What I'm just thinking about is interesting. I know with myself, I often have a lot of ideas floating around, and it almost seems like someone made this decision for you in a way, just by presenting the opportunity, and you just kind of decided, I'm just going to give it a shot.
Well, yes, in the sense that I wasn't actively out trying to drum up this business. It was a connection that came through a friend, which is another idea that you'll hear about making the most of opportunities that present themselves. And there were probably times where I've had many people before that ask me, hey, can you do this or do that? And sometimes I did it for free, but other times I didn't. And I think that the necessity at the time and me thinking, oh, wow, here's something that before would have just been a nuisance and now it's an opportunity for me to make money or support myself was kind of an eye-opening thing.
So that's interesting you bring that up. So you're saying if it wasn't a necessity, it would have been a nuisance. So if you
Probably.
were strapped for cash, would you have done this?
Maybe not in that moment. Like I said, I had said no before to other things. And I do think that you'll hear one of my favorite authors, Alexander Dumas, who wrote The Count of Monte Cristo. There's a section in that book where this guy was thrown into prison, and he talks about how his senses became hyper-focused because of the extreme circumstances around him. And he makes the statement that he never would have done these certain things if this misfortune hadn't befallen him. So he was thrown into prison, and while he was in prison, he ended up learning several languages, and there was a priest in there who was a physics guy and a scientist, and he taught him all this stuff about martial arts and the physical sciences at the time in the 17 or 1800s. And I thought, wow, like I've seen a correlation with that in my life where events forced me to draw things out of myself that probably may not have come to light otherwise without hardship.
Mm-hmm. So it's interesting. There's a Facebook group called Screw the 9 to 5, which is basically people who are trying to get rid of their 9 to 5 job and like do their side business or their product or whatever. And some people still have 9 to 5 jobs. Some people have left their job. Someone posted a question and asked, how did you finally screw your 9 to 5? How did you finally leave? And what I thought was interesting is even though you have all of these speakers and whatnot talking about people just taking the plunge and taking a step of faith or doing something risky, a lot of the people who left their 9 to 5 did so because of like a layoff or being fired.
Mm-hmm.
Even despite this being a hugely entrepreneurial community, the majority of the people there who had finally like started companies and whatnot didn't do it because they just up and quit their job. They did it because they were basically forced out of it.
Mm-hmm.
So it just kind of makes me wonder, it's like you say, you just did this out of extreme circumstances. So it's like as entrepreneurs, like is it to our advantage to try to put ourselves into extreme circumstances just to like force our hand?
Maybe. And I think for me, one thing that was fortunate was I could not find my dream job. I tried to get hired at design agencies in the late 90s, early 2000s, and I wasn't qualified. I would go into places and I didn't have a degree in design and art, and I would take in my sketches and drawings and things that I had made, and there were just far better candidates. And so I was always struggling. I had to have 2 and 3 jobs at times to try to pay the rent, always had to have roommates. And I think for me, what would have happened if I did have a $100,000 a year job with insurance? That may have been very hard for me to leave. But because I wasn't in that situation, it was really easy for me. It wasn't like I was leaving some incredible career behind to do this. Mm-hmm. So I do feel empathy for people who are having to choose, how do I quit my profession to start this thing? And so, yeah, I didn't have that really as a factor.
Right.
Yeah, I think as I think about kind of this whole conversation, we're kind of talking about risk and comfort. And the idea that comfort really does hold us back in a lot of ways. And yeah, this idea of risk really does hold us back. And I think of my life as I've kind of seen different steps of faith producing great fruit and positive outcomes and success. It comes from this like being willing to take the risk and saying yes and stepping into it. And at the end of the day, living with the outcomes of that. And some of the things I've said yes to didn't work out and it kind of put me back. But, well, now I'm in an even better place to take a new risk
Mm-hmm.
that could lead to something else. And so
I love that, and I think there's a lot of value in what you said about taking risks. I know some of the best stories I have is when I've done that. The thing is, what I'm observing though is like a lot of these people who end up doing stuff, like Nate, for example, didn't actually elect to take a risk. It was just because circumstance forced them into it.
yeah, I think I'm at a place where the idea of comfort.
Mm-hmm.
Because Nate was in a position where he wasn't comfortable,
Yeah.
and so it's easier to take risk when you're not in comfort.
Ooh,
And
that's
so,
good. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think if we're talking to a lot of people on this podcast, I think there's a lot of people that are in that comfortable position, and you're in a harder place.
Or familiar.
Yeah, or familiar.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's another great word for it. And so if you're in that position, you're in a harder place to make this dream a reality and step into that, because you have the comfort, you have the kind of the safety net there, and where if you don't, falling on your face is what you do every day. And so I don't know.
Well, it makes me think of Tom Hanks in Castaway, where the necessity is the mother of invention. So would Tom Hanks have ever built a raft like that if he wasn't stranded on a deserted island? And the raft became the key to get him back to civilization. So in a very real sense, it took him to a whole new life that he never would have had. But yeah, you get in these situations where you're forced to examine and look with minutiae and detail at things and use your strengths to try to create something that can literally save your life.
Yeah.
Well, neat. So that's pretty awesome talk. I think we talked on some good things, and I feel like we could we'd either keep going here or just I feel there's like multiple points here that we could talk about. Like I'd love to do a talk brainstorming about like how do we get ourselves to a point of being willing to take a risk. I think we could do a whole talk on, like, especially if we prepare, we could probably do a whole talk on that. I think there's some other things we could talk on as well that was brought up, just the idea, of comfort, that sort of thing. But is there any other major point you guys wanted to bring up? We're at a pretty good time marker.
Yeah, I think that kind of landed us in a good spot.
Okay.
Awesome. So
Sounds good.
Nice little microcast here. Let us know what you think if you got this far. I'd love to hear your feedback. What'd you like? What didn't you like? Did you hate the whole thing? Whatever. Just let us know.
Any negative feedback, send to mattmolnar at gmail.com.
All right.
Thanks, guys.